The ceramic mug shattered against the mahogany desk, sending cold coffee splashing across quarterly reports that had taken weeks to compile. Victoria Starling stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her designer blazer, watching the brown liquid seep into paper worth millions in projected revenue. "You are easy to replace," Bennett Crawford bellowed, his handsome face twisted with frustration. His silver tie had come loose during his tirade, and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. "One phone call. That is all it would take. One phone call and I could have someone competent sitting at your desk by tomorrow morning." Victoria had worked for Bennett Crawford for 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days. She knew this because she had counted every single one of them, marking time like a prisoner scratching lines into a cell wall. She had survived his impossible standards, his midnight phone calls, his legendary temper tantrums that sent grown executives running for cover. She had learned to read his moods like a meteorologist studying storm patterns, anticipating his needs before he knew he had them. But today something inside her had shifted. Perhaps it was the way he had dismissed her carefully prepared analysis without reading a single page. Perhaps it was the fact that she had missed her younger sister's wedding last month because Bennett had decided at the last minute that he needed her presence at a conference in Singapore. Perhaps it was simply that after 4 years of being treated like furniture with a pulse, she had finally reached the limit of her endurance. "Then explain why you never can," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the tension in the room like a blade through silk. Bennett's mouth opened, then closed. His gray eyes, usually sharp with calculation or bright with anger, went completely blank. "Excuse me," he managed. Victoria took a step forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "You heard me, Mr. Crawford. If I am so easy to replace, why have you never managed to do it? In 4 years, you have threatened to fire me approximately 237 times. I kept count. And yet here I am." Bennett straightened his spine, attempting to regain control of the situation. "That is because I am a generous employer who believes in giving people chances to improve." "No." Victoria shook her head slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "It is because the last time you tried to replace me, your temporary assistant accidentally deleted an entire server of client data. The time before that, the poor woman lasted exactly 6 hours before she quit in tears. And the time before that, your replacement mixed up your schedule so badly that you missed a meeting with the Japanese delegation and nearly lost a $40 million contract." Bennett's jaw tightened. Those were isolated incidents. They were patterns, Mr. Crawford. Patterns that you refuse to acknowledge because doing so would require you to admit something that terrifies you. She watched his hands curl into fists at his sides, watched the familiar flush of anger creep up his neck. But she also saw something else, something she had never noticed before. Beneath the arrogance and the fury, there was fear. Genuine, unmistakable fear. "And what exactly is that, Miss Starling?" he asked through gritted teeth. "That you need me. That despite all your money and all your power and all your carefully constructed walls, you have become dependent on someone you treat like garbage. And the worst part is that you have absolutely no idea how to function without me." The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere in the distance, Victoria could hear the hum of the building's climate control system, the muffled sounds of traffic 40 stories below. But in this room, in this moment, there was only the sound of 2 people confronting a truth that had been building for years. Bennett moved first, circling around his desk with the predatory grace that had made him famous in boardrooms across 3 continents. He stopped just close enough that Victoria could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that she had ordered for him herself. "You are being dramatic," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "Am I?" Victoria reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is my resignation, effective immediately. I am giving you 2 weeks' notice because despite everything, I am a professional. Consider it my final gift to you." She placed the letter on his desk, carefully avoiding the spreading coffee stain, and turned toward the door. She had made it 3 steps when his voice stopped her. "Victoria." It was the first time in 4 years that he had used her first name. The sound of it in his mouth, shaped by that deep voice she had grown so accustomed to hearing bark orders, was jarring enough to make her pause. "What?" she asked without turning around. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. When Bennett finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Where will you go?" Victoria allowed herself a small smile, though he could not see it. "Somewhere I am valued, Mr. Crawford. Somewhere my contributions are recognized with more than insults and broken coffee mugs." She glanced back over her shoulder, meeting his eyes one final time. "Oh, and for the record, your 3 o'clock meeting tomorrow is with the Anderson Group, not Anderson and Associates. They are different companies. I am sure your replacement will figure that out eventually." She walked out of his office without looking back, her spine straight and her head held high. Behind her, Bennett Crawford stood frozen in place, staring at the door that had just closed on 4 years of carefully maintained denial. It took him exactly 47 minutes to realize that he had no idea where the Anderson Group files were located. It took him another 23 minutes to discover that he could not access his own calendar without Victoria's login credentials. And it took him 3 more days of absolute chaos to finally admit what Victoria had known all along. He was utterly, completely, catastrophically lost without her. The first replacement arrived on Monday morning, a young man named Timothy with an impressive resume and an eager smile. By Wednesday afternoon, Timothy had accidentally sent confidential merger documents to a competing firm and was escorted from the building by security. The second replacement, a seasoned professional named Dorothy, lasted slightly longer. She made it through an entire week before Bennett's volcanic temper reduced her to a quivering mess in the break room. Her resignation letter was 2 words long: "I quit." The third, fourth, and fifth replacements came and went in rapid succession, each one lasting shorter than the last. Bennett burned through executive assistants the way other people burned through disposable coffee cups, leaving a trail of traumatized former employees in his wake. Meanwhile, 15 blocks away in a converted warehouse that housed one of the city's most promising tech startups, Victoria Starling was thriving. Her new employer, a brilliant young entrepreneur named Rachel Okonkwo, had recognized her value immediately. Within weeks, Victoria had been promoted from executive assistant to operations manager. Within months, she was being groomed for a vice president position. She had a corner office with windows that actually opened. She had colleagues who said please and thank you. She had a boss who regularly brought the team homemade cookies and remembered everyone's birthdays. It was everything she had ever wanted. So why did she still find herself thinking about Bennett Crawford at 3 in the morning? The answer came 6 months after her resignation, delivered in person by the last man she ever expected to see standing in the lobby of her new office building. Bennett looked different. Thinner, somehow, with shadows under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. His suit was still impeccable, his posture still commanding, but there was a hesitancy in his movements that Victoria had never seen before. "I need to talk to you," he said without preamble. "It is about the Harrison project." Victoria crossed her arms over her chest. "You could have called. You would not have answered." He was right, of course. She had ignored 17 of his phone calls over the past month, deleted 43 emails without reading them, and instructed the reception desk to turn him away twice. She had thought she was being professional, maintaining healthy boundaries with a former employer who had treated her poorly. But standing here now, looking at the man who had once made her life a daily exercise in frustration and somehow also made her feel more alive than anyone else ever had, Victoria was forced to confront a different possibility entirely. Maybe she had been running from something other than Bennett Crawford's temper. Maybe she had been running from herself. 5 minutes, Victoria said, glancing at her watch. "That is all the time I can spare." Bennett nodded, accepting the limitation with a grace that surprised her. 5 minutes is more than I deserve." They found a quiet corner in the building's courtyard, a small garden space tucked between glass towers where employees came to eat lunch and escape the constant hum of productivity. Victoria chose a bench beneath a flowering magnolia tree, positioning herself at one end while Bennett took the other, leaving a careful distance between them. "The Harrison project," Bennett began, pulling a folder from his briefcase. It is the most ambitious undertaking Pinnacle has ever attempted. A complete overhaul of municipal infrastructure systems across 12 major cities. The contract is worth $800 million over 5 years. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Congratulations. I fail to see what this has to do with me. Everything. Bennett opened the folder, revealing architectural plans and financial projections. The original proposal was yours. You drafted it during your last month at Pinnacle, before I had a chance to destroy everything between us. I found it in your old files. Victoria remembered that proposal. She had spent weeks developing it, pouring her knowledge of Bennett's business philosophy and her own innovative ideas into a document she had hoped would finally earn his respect. She had never shown it to him because she had resigned before finding the courage. That was a rough draft, she said carefully. Incomplete. It was brilliant. Bennett met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze she had never seen before. Humility. I showed it to the board. They approved full development immediately. But there is a problem. Let me guess. You cannot execute it without understanding the vision behind it. More than that. Bennett closed the folder, his fingers lingering on the cover. I cannot execute it without you. The Harrison Group specifically requested that you be involved after they saw your name on the original documentation. Apparently, your reputation has preceded you. Victoria felt a flutter of satisfaction at that. She had worked hard to build relationships with clients during her time at Pinnacle, often serving as the human face of a company whose CEO could be abrasive at best and terrifying at worst. I have a job, she reminded him. A good job with people who appreciate me. I know. And I am not asking you to leave it. Bennett shifted on the bench, turning to face her more fully. I am proposing something different. A partnership. Your company and mine, working together on the Harrison project. Equal collaboration, shared credit, mutual benefit. The proposal caught Victoria off guard. Bennett Crawford did not share anything, least of all credit. His ego was legendary, his need for control absolute. The fact that he was sitting here offering partnership suggested that something fundamental had changed. What happened to you? She asked quietly. Bennett was silent for a long moment, watching a pair of sparrows chase each other through the magnolia branches. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. I spent 6 months trying to prove you wrong. 6 months convincing myself that your absence was merely an inconvenience, that any competent professional could fill your shoes. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I went through 11 assistants, Victoria. 11 people, each one more qualified on paper than the last. And each one failed because none of them understood something that you grasped instinctively. Which was? That I am not just difficult. I am broken. His admission hung in the air between them. I grew up with nothing. My father left when I was 7, and my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I learned early that the only person I could rely on was myself. That dependence was weakness. That needing anyone was the first step toward being abandoned by them. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a softening toward this man who had caused her so much frustration. She had always known there was something wounded beneath Bennett's armor of arrogance. She had simply never expected him to acknowledge it. So you push people away before they can leave, she said. You make yourself impossible to work with because if they quit, you can tell yourself it was your choice all along. Bennett nodded slowly. It took losing you to realize what I had been doing. And why it was costing me everything that actually mattered. The 5 minutes Victoria had allotted stretched into 15, then 30. They talked about the Harrison project, yes, but also about deeper things. Bennett's childhood in a cramped apartment where winter meant choosing between heat and food. Victoria's own struggles as the eldest daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything so she could have opportunities they never had. The pressure they both felt to succeed, to prove themselves worthy of the chances they had been given. By the time the afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the courtyard, something had fundamentally shifted between them. I will talk to Rachel, Victoria said finally. If she agrees to the partnership, I will consider being involved. But I need you to understand something, Bennett. Name it. I am not coming back to be your assistant. I am not coming back to be ordered around or yelled at or treated like an extension of your ego. If we work together, it will be as equals. Full stop. Bennett extended his hand. Partners. Victoria looked at his outstretched palm, remembering all the times those hands had slammed documents onto desks, thrown objects across rooms, gestured dismissively at her ideas. But she also remembered the way those same hands had signed checks for charitable causes he never publicized, had helped a terrified intern pick up scattered papers after a clumsy accident, had once steadied her elbow when she stumbled on an icy sidewalk outside the office. Bennett Crawford was not a simple man. He was complicated and infuriating and deeply flawed. But maybe, just maybe, he was also capable of change. She took his hand. Partners. The collaboration between Pinnacle Enterprises and Okonkwo Technologies became the talk of the business world. Industry analysts called it an unlikely alliance, a marriage of old money and new innovation. The Harrison Group was thrilled, the press was fascinated, and suddenly Victoria found herself spending more time with Bennett than she had during all her years as his assistant. The difference was that now she could push back. Now she could challenge his ideas without fear of reprisal, could argue her position knowing that he would listen rather than simply overrule. Their meetings became legendary among their respective teams, passionate debates that sometimes lasted for hours but always ended with solutions neither could have reached alone. You are infuriating, Bennett told her one evening as they worked late in his office, empty takeout containers scattered across the conference table. The feeling is mutual, Victoria replied without looking up from her laptop. Your insistence on traditional vendor relationships is going to cost us 3% efficiency on the implementation timeline. Traditional relationships are built on trust. Trust reduces risk. Innovation requires risk. Playing it safe is just failure in slow motion. Bennett leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. When did you become so fearless? Victoria finally met his eyes. When I realized that the worst thing that could happen already had, and I survived it. Which was? Losing a job I had poured my entire self into. Walking away from someone who had become the center of my professional universe, even though that universe was toxic. Starting over from nothing when I was 34 years old with a mortgage and student loans and a family that was counting on me. The admission cost her something. She could see Bennett processing it, understanding for perhaps the first time what her resignation had really meant. She had not just quit a job. She had torn herself away from an identity she had spent years constructing. I never apologized, Bennett said quietly. For how I treated you. For the yelling and the impossible demands and the way I took you for granted. No. You did not. He stood, moving around the conference table until he was standing in front of her. Victoria rose instinctively, some old habit of meeting him at eye level whenever he invaded her space. I am sorry, he said. Those 3 words, spoken with genuine remorse. Not because I need something from you. Not because I want you to come back. Just because you deserved better, and I was too afraid to give it to you. Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, tears she refused to let fall. She had waited 4 years to hear those words. 4 years of wondering if she had imagined the connection between them, if she had invented meaning where none existed. Thank you, she whispered. They stood there in the dim light of his office, closer than they had ever been when she worked for him. Victoria could see the gray at his temples that had not been there 4 years ago, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. But she could also see something else. Warmth. Vulnerability. A man finally allowing himself to be seen. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Bennett's phone rang, shattering the silence, and they both stepped back as if waking from a dream. I should go, Victoria said, gathering her things. Early meeting tomorrow. Of course. Bennett cleared his throat, returning to his professional demeanor. I will have the revised vendor proposals on your desk by 9. She nodded, heading for the door. But something made her pause at the threshold, looking back at him one last time. For what it is worth, she said, I think you are changing. I think you are becoming the man you were always capable of being. She left before he could respond, but she carried the image of his face with her all the way home. The surprise in his eyes. The hope. And something else. Something that looked very much like love. The Chicago conference was supposed to be straightforward. 3 days of presentations, networking events, and strategic meetings with potential investors. Victoria had done dozens of these events during her time at Pinnacle, managing every detail with the precision that had made her indispensable. What she had not anticipated was the blizzard. It started on the second day, fat flakes of snow that seemed harmless enough at first. By evening, the city was buried under 2 feet of powder with more falling by the hour. Flights were cancelled. Roads were closed. The conference attendees found themselves stranded in a luxury hotel with nothing to do but wait out the storm. This is a disaster, Victoria muttered, staring out at the white wasteland that had once been downtown Chicago. We were supposed to meet with the Morrison Foundation tomorrow. They specifically requested an in-person presentation. I called them, Bennett said from behind her. They are snowed in too. We rescheduled for next week. Victoria turned, surprised by his calm. In the old days, a disruption like this would have sent him into a rage. He would have blamed everyone within reach, demanded impossible solutions, made life miserable for anyone unlucky enough to be in his orbit. Instead, he was standing there with 2 glasses of wine, looking almost relaxed. I figured we might as well make the best of it, he said, offering her one of the glasses. The hotel bar is completely overrun, but I convinced the kitchen to send up a bottle. Victoria accepted the wine, studying him with open curiosity. Who are you and what have you done with Bennett Crawford? He laughed, and the sound was genuine, warm. Maybe being trapped by forces beyond my control has given me some perspective. They settled into the suite sitting area, Victoria curling into one corner of the sofa while Bennett took an armchair across from her. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the city and creating a cocoon of quiet intimacy. Tell me something, Victoria said after a long moment of comfortable silence. Why did you become the way you were? And I do not mean the childhood stuff. I mean specifically at work. You can be charming when you want to be. I have seen you win over hostile board members and skeptical investors. So why were you always so different with me? Bennett swirled his wine, considering the question. Because you scared me. I scared you. Victoria could not hide her disbelief. I am 5'4" and I could not intimidate a kitten. Not that kind of scared. Bennett leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You saw through me from the first day. Everyone else bought the act. The powerful CEO, the self-made billionaire, the man who had it all figured out. But you looked at me like you knew exactly how fragile it all was. Like you could see every crack in the foundation. So you pushed me away. I tried to make you quit. For 4 years, I did everything I could think of to drive you out before you could get close enough to hurt me. He shook his head, laughing at himself. The irony is that by treating you terribly, I guaranteed exactly the outcome I was trying to avoid. You left, and it nearly destroyed me. Victoria set down her wine glass, her heart beating faster than it should. Why are you telling me this now? Because I am tired of being afraid. Bennett met her eyes, and there was nothing guarded in his expression anymore. And because I have spent the last 8 months working beside you, watching you challenge me and improve me and make me want to be better. And somewhere along the way, I realized that what I felt was not just professional respect. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Victoria felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at water she could not see the bottom of. Bennett, she started. You do not have to say anything. He held up a hand. I know this is complicated. We work together. We have history. There are 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. Then why bring it up? Because I have spent my entire adult life making safe choices. Building walls. Protecting myself from anything that might hurt me. He stood, moving to the window to stare out at the snow. And all it got me was a corner office full of broken coffee mugs and a string of employees who could not wait to escape. Victoria rose too, crossing the room to stand beside him. Their reflections in the dark glass showed two people frozen in a moment of decision. I spent 4 years being furious with you, she said quietly. 4 years of going home exhausted and frustrated and wondering why I stayed. I know. But I also spent 4 years feeling more alive than I ever had before. She turned to face him, forcing him to look at her. You challenged me. You pushed me to be better. You made me discover capabilities I did not know I had. And when I finally walked away, I told myself it was because I deserved better treatment. It was. Victoria shook her head. It was partly that. But it was also because I was terrified of what I was starting to feel. It was easier to be angry than to admit that somewhere along the way, I had fallen for the most impossible man I had ever met. The confession left her breathless and vulnerable in a way she had not allowed herself to be in years. She watched Bennett's face change, watched hope and fear and something deeper wore across his features. Victoria, he breathed. I am not saying this because I want to go back to the way things were. She held up a hand, needing to finish. I am saying this because for the first time, I think we might actually have a chance at something real. Something equal. Something where we both get to be whole people instead of just roles we play for each other. Bennett reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness she had never imagined him capable of. I have loved you for longer than I knew how to admit. I was just too broken to show it in any way that made sense. Then show me now. He kissed her then, soft and tentative at first, as if he expected her to pull away. When she did not, when she instead wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer, the kiss deepened into something that felt like a promise. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. Inside, two people who had spent years fighting each other finally stopped fighting themselves. The Harrison Project launched 6 months later to unprecedented success. Industry publications called it a masterclass in collaborative innovation. The partnership between Pinnacle Enterprises and Okonkwo Technologies became a model for how traditional corporations and startups could work together. But the real story, the one that mattered, was much smaller and much more personal. Victoria Starling and Bennett Crawford were married on a spring afternoon, in a garden ceremony attended by family, friends, and more than a few former colleagues who had never expected to see Bennett Crawford smile the way he smiled at his bride. Rachel Okonkwo served as maid of honor. She had given Victoria her blessing months ago, recognizing that some partnerships transcended the professional. You know, Victoria whispered as she and Bennett shared their first dance, you never did manage to replace me. Bennett pulled her closer, his lips brushing her ear. I never wanted to. I just needed 4 years and a broken heart to figure that out. Slow learner. But I got there eventually. He spun her gently, the lights catching the joy in both their faces. And now I plan to spend the rest of my life proving that some things are worth waiting for. Victoria looked up at the man who had once been her greatest challenge and was now her greatest gift. She thought about all the paths that had led them here, all the fights and frustrations and moments of doubt. She thought about the person she had been when she first walked into his office, and the person she had become by walking out of it. You know what I realized, she said. What is that? You were right, all those years ago. I am easy to replace. Any competent professional could learn to manage your calendar and organize your files. She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. But what we have now, this partnership, this love, this life we are building together, that is irreplaceable. And it took both of us being brave enough to change to find it. Bennett kissed her forehead, then her nose, then finally her lips. Best decision I ever made, he murmured against her mouth. Letting you walk out that door so you could walk back in as my equal. The music swelled around them as they danced, surrounded by people who loved them, at the beginning of a story that would last the rest of their lives. And somewhere in Bennett's old office, carefully preserved in a frame on his desk, sat a small pink sticky note that read, "Your meeting with Anderson Group is on Tuesday." A reminder of where they had started, and how far they had come. Some replacements, it turned out, were not replacements at all. They were upgrades. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.